there! Welcome to Culture by Culture, a multi-dimensional exploration of Black and Asian pop cultural ties. I'm your activism adjacent host, Delia, and today I'm joined by dancer, writer, activist, and founder of Blasian March, Rohan Zhou-Lee. Hi, Rohan. How are you?
Hi, doing great. Thanks for having me here.
I'm so excited to have you. Go ahead and tell the audience a little bit about yourself. I know I did not cover the breadth of what you do. You do so much.
A little bit about me. Well, like you said, I am a dancer, mostly focusing in ballet, but I've done musicals like West Side Story. Before the pandemic, I literally had an off-Broadway debut. And then, COVID
How
took
neat.
all that away.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
It's fine.
That's rough.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
As a writer, I write poetry, I work as a journalist, I write fantasy, some science fiction, all kind of revolving around Afro-Asian solidarity, Black-Asian relations. Yeah, that's me outside of activism. Well, I mean, that's also activism in a different way. But yeah, as an activist, as you said, founder of the Blasian March. We are a Black-Asian solidarity collective at this point. And we build solidarity through one, education on parallel experiences with racial injustice, and two, mutual celebration. Since our founding in October 11th, 2020, during the lockdown, which is also LGBT History Month, Filipino American History Month, as well as National Coming Out Day. Since then, we have organized actions in New Haven, Chicago, Los Angeles. We also have actions coming up in Sacramento. It's been a wonderful adventure seeing so many amazing leaders in different places take on this idea.
That's very cool. I was going to ask because for starters, the way that I came across Blasian March was months and months ago when I was researching and just getting stuff together for this podcast, because I love, as a creator, that's one of my favorite things about being a creator, is being in and among and adjacent to the spaces that you're going to be creating in. And I was just looking to see, who's in the space as far as like activism is concerned. And so I found the Blasian March, but I couldn't find stuff that far back. But y'all have done so much. So y'all really have been active only since 2020, end of 2020.
Yeah.
That is wild. I encourage you all to go find their socials, their whatever socials y'all use. They've done so much, and it's really, really impressive in such a short time. If you've done any work in the nonprofit or activist space, it's hard to mobilize. Like, that is a difficult thing to do. So to have accomplished so much in such a short time is really amazing.
Oh, thank you.
I was going to ask, well, I guess that segues very perfectly. What are the origins of the Blasian March? I can kind of imagine, given the time frame, that it was October 2020, but go ahead.
Oh man, the Blasian March origin story. Well, I definitely gotta give a shout out to all the community organizers I collaborated with in Chicago before I moved to New York. That's for one thing. But during the lockdown, I think there were multiple layers to the roots of Blasian March. So definitely on one hand, there was the rise in anti-Asian violence. And there were folks kind of mobilizing around there. And personally, I was trying to be like, yay, we're here. But also, Black Lives Matter, can we do like a Black Asian sort of like work together sort of thing? And with certain leaders, that was not a thing. So I was like, okay, cool, we'll keep it rolling. And then like there was some drama, which I don't need to go into for time's sake. But essentially, the Blasian March became my healing process from all that. So I was like, you know what? If there's not space to do Black Asian solidarity, I'm just going to do it myself. And then that also came on top of attending so many other, BLM actions and seeing how, I don't know how it was in DC if you were there during the lockdown or...
I sure was.
I'm sorry. But here in New York, there were so many like amazing just like offshoots of BLM. So like even though like BLM was founded by 3 Black women, most of whom are queer, a lot of the BLM movement at that time period was just so cishet male dominated, as one can expect would happen in any patriarchal culture. As it goes. Right. The straight men take over. You're like, why are you here?
An evergreen question.
So, you would see so many of the other organizers being like, okay, no. And so you would see offshoots like Black Women's March. You would see Black Disabled Lives Matters. You'd also
That's right.
see Stonewall, which was specifically for the Black LGBTQ plus community. And one thing I would notice a lot is at these actions, you would see so many Asian Americans like working in the background, doing a lot of like logistical safety work. And at a couple of rallies, I would, hear some of the leaders being like, thank you to all of our allies. Thank you for the white people for coming. Thank you for Latinos for coming. And then like no mention of the Asians who were there. And I was kind of like, well, that's also a problem because we are now participating in invisibilization. And I think we as Black people know what that feels like.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it doesn't make sense. So as someone who's literally a Black Asian, literally in the middle, I'm seeing all these issues. I'm like, okay, how can we now make a space where all these problems are now being addressed in a situation that's healing? How are we addressing the patriarchal violence that really took place during 2020 in our movement spaces? How are we now making it possible for us to see solidarity is happening and we are not erasing it as we work? So that all led to Blasian March being what it was.
That mixture of things.
That hodgepodge of just total chaotic evil. Maybe chaotic neutral, I don't know.
Out of bad can come good. I think chaotic evil, that's when I think of 2020, it feels chaotic evil to me. So I don't think that's inaccurate. I really love that you are talking about seeing the Asian people who were showing up in solidarity. I wonder if you knew at that time about the historical coalitions that existed in the past, or was that something you learned later? Because I think that's what's so fascinating is that these connections have always been there in some way, sometimes praised, other times, and a lot of the times not. And a lot of that history gets lost to time. And I think there's a lot of people in this space who are trying to prop up the history you do know and we were able to hang on to.
Right.
But I wonder if you learned it later, what that learning process was like for you.
Yeah, actually, I knew about some of it beforehand. Obviously, we are all still learning. I'm still learning things. I'm like, I didn't know that happened. Like,
right.
Like, I didn't know the very first moments of Black Asian solidarity were like late 1700s on Turtle Island. Like,
right.
I was like, whoa, like, okay, Philippines, like, I love my people. I mean, I'd already done some research like on my own, probably, I want to say during and after high school, like late high school. No, even later, I think, probably college, around that time. Because like before college, I hadn't really given myself permission to explore what it meant to be Asian American while I have a skin color like this and a hair texture that's very curly.
Very real, yeah.
And I definitely was aware of like some of the Filipino struggles. I was definitely aware of the internment of the Japanese Americans. I already knew about icons like Yuri Kochiyama, Grace Lee Boggs. But yeah, I think during that time period, moving forward, it was definitely a place you can do more research, you can learn more. So that was like, oh, let's learn about Kyoshi Kuromiya. I already knew about folks like Bayard Rustin, but before and still learning as I'm going.
Because I found it so beautiful going through this process, having this baseline of knowledge, but then it being fleshed out in such a beautiful way, like, oh, this history is even bigger. Like all the time, I think, okay, wow, I've learned so much and seen, like, uncovered so much of our connections, if you will, and there's always more. And I think, that's just always so heartening to me, and I find it to be such a beautiful thing. And going back to what you were saying about, to be clear to any listeners, I have no idea what drama they were talking about, but I will say for me personally, I'm not Blasian, but I am mixed. And I feel like those experiences are different, but being mixed in general comes with a particular perspective. And I remember part of the reason I found Blasian March was because I was finding a lot of work and coalition around Asians for Black Lives. That might be a specific name. I'm not pointing anyone out. There's just a lot of pages and groups similar to that, Yeah. But a lot of times I'm like, but there are Black Asian people. I know there are Black Asian people. Like, where are they? That was why I was so excited to find your page, because I feel like coming from that perspective, you have a very unique perspective. Not just you, all Blasians have a very unique perspective and unique voice to offer to that movement. And so I'm really glad that you did the work. I'm glad that it was healing for you, because again, 2020 was really rough. I know me and a group I work with, Black Nerds Crate, had a similar come to Jesus, if you will, type of moment in 2020 where you just have to, like, I don't know, rise from, I guess, the ashes, if you will, because,
Basically.
it was, basically. And so you kind of spoke to this already, but what did you feel specifically was missing or needed in both or either communities, however you want to phrase it?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm gonna say education. Like
Okay.
that was a big thing that I think was really, really missing. Like I remember going to one rally for the Asian community, and one femme, was referencing Yuri Kochiyama and Grace Lee Boggs, and then like later, some guy on the mic was like, "Oh, those people don't matter anymore," and I was like,
Oh, oh no.
I was like, wigs were snatched and heads were rolled, honey. Like, what did you just say? Like,
I can't believe.
I know. I was like, she did not just insult the ancestors. Oh no. Oh no, 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 no.
Literally though.
No. Oh my God. Wigs will fly. Like,
that's so nice of you to say that it's an issue of education. But okay, go on.
Yeah. And then even in 2021, when we were seeing a lot of bigger attempts at Black Asian solidarity, I think a lot of folks kind of fell into the trap of a lot of misleading narratives that were being portrayed in mainstream media. Mm-hmm. Now, I definitely will say I know a lot of journalists in the field, and they're just doing their best with the information that they are given. Mm-hmm. But as a result, a lot of times you would see in the news, anti-Asian hate crimes or anti-Asian violence where the perpetrator was Black. Mm-hmm. And so this led to the assumption that Black people were majority responsible. Mm-hmm. And that is completely not true.
Right.
The Virulent Hate Project out of University of Michigan found in a survey that in that time period, 89.6% of anti-Asian violence came from white people.
I feel like the pretends to be shocked gif.
Like, right? I was like, oh. I was like, I'm shocked, but it tracks. Like,
it absolutely tracks.
Right. So since that information wasn't being distributed, a lot of folks were trying to build solidarity based off of misconceptions or misunderstandings. Mm-hmm. And that's not a foundation for true, long-lasting community work. That was definitely a big part. Another thing that I found is that so many people, because they didn't know their history, they all thought that this was a new concept. Like Black Asian solidarity is a new thing. And unfortunately, because you all think it's new, you're not taking the time to look at the blueprint, look at these historical figures and icons who are already doing this work. And it's like, okay, now how can I take that legacy and add the next chapter, So I think those education was such a critical part that was just missing. So we're working on it.
Yeah, it's wild to me to think. For me, I've talked about this in the podcast before. Like, I am such a history nerd. That's where I enter spaces from just naturally. It's wild to me to imagine coming into a space and not, I don't know, wondering if it's been done before. And I'm not saying these people had ill intent. Of course not. It's just probably thanks to the work you've done in part that there's more education going around. I think I've seen a lot, even before wanting to start this podcast, like a lot of infographics and stuff talking about Yuri, Grace Lee Boggs. Like, people are trying to get at least the, maybe you'd call it Afro-Asian Coalition 101 information out there. Yeah. And so I think that's really, really great to see that. I'm sure there's still far to go.
There's still far to go, but thank you for those flowers because, I'm always looking back and being like, okay, what do we do? How did this go? Was it okay? Did everyone have a good time? Did we build joy? Did we build new stories? Like, what is happening here? But recently, I know as far as last year, we shifted gears because, we were seeing that a lot of the protests were dying down, our numbers for attendance was going down. So I was like, okay, obviously this is not helping the community anymore. So where can we shift? And myself being a writer and also myself being a total history nerd, I was like, we should give out free books. Mm-hmm. So we launched our book fair program last year, through which we give out free books from Black, Asian, and Blasian writers as a means to build solidarity through understanding. We invite attendees to take books from a community that's not theirs, just so you can try to understand someone else's experience. Also, since we're on stolen land, we also include Native literature, and it's really exploded as a program. This year we had our second one. It's going to Sacramento for Pride. So many orgs are now asking, we want to do a book fair. And I was like, let's go. Let's do this abolition work. Yes.
It looked like it really, the one in New York I saw on, I'm not in New York, so I saw it on socials and it really popped off. I don't know, I was so excited to see, yes, the turnout, of course, is always exciting to see in these sort of things, but more so I was excited to see for y'all, like the amount of support on the back end it looked like y'all were getting.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
The
yeah.
books that y'all were getting, the outreach that y'all were getting, people supporting, like that is so cool to me to see that there's a need and it's being met, but people are responding because it's really hard as small creators, as small community builders to get momentum, but
Absolutely.
especially as people of color, especially as queer people, like these are things that are really hard to get support around.
Absolutely.
I wonder why.
Right?
I wonder why. But yeah, it was really cool for me to see. And I think sometimes, yes, the work is community building in person, but also the effect of others outside of that being able to see it. So it's not surprising to me that you have a ton of people reaching out like, I want to do book fairs. Because when you see that, it gets you fired up.
It does. And it's so beautiful because like we know as people of color, there is such a demand for literature in all of our community spaces. There is such a powerful literary culture in every community of color, but the way it is right now with publishing, there's such a control. There are assumptions that, people of color don't want these books. So that's why we're seeing so few bookstores in BIPOC neighborhoods, which is here in New York, it's starting to finally change. But it's like, no, people want these books. Like, I remember during the lockdown, I used to live in the Bronx. And we did, in collaboration with some Latinx organizers, fundraiser for, I want to say, flooding in some Central American country. I want to say Honduras. I'm not sure. I feel bad for not remembering. There's so many climate catastrophes. I'm like,
it's all the time now. It's real bad.
Right. I can't remember. It's so awful. But yeah, we were giving out free books, and as soon as word got out there was free books, the lines were just wrapped around the block. People were trying to get free books, and I was like, this is beautiful.
Wow.
So I'm like, no, people want books. It's just cost. It really is cost.
Cost is a big one. It's also the accessibility of knowledge, of knowing what's out there.
Right.
And unfortunately, we're seeing in places in the country where libraries are being defunded and devalued and et cetera. Libraries do a lot of that work because also online, it's such an algorithmic driven thing. Any store, any webpage, even, listicles talking about books. So getting the books that have the stories that people want to hear into their hands, it's such a hard thing unless you're just really plugged into the space, you have the money, the time, all of that.
Right.
So I am not surprised that the line was around the block because when I talk to readers, as a reader myself, not a great reader, but a reader myself.
You read, it's fine.
Yeah, I read, it's fine. The TBR pile is big, but they're there.
I have at least 6 or 7 plastic bins of books I've yet to read, so please, you are not as bad as I am, I assure you.
Isn't that maybe that's just being a normal reader, is having a ton of books you haven't read. But what I was going to say is that when I speak to readers, a lot of the time, they're hungry for a certain type of story. Everybody has this ideal type of story that they want to read, and finding that story to fit that what they're wanting to read is so difficult. And a lot of times I want to hear a story like this from somebody who looks like me or who looks like my friends. Absolutely. Or whatever the case may be. And that's so difficult. And I think it's wonderful that you found this niche and have really plugged into the community and the community's responded. I would ask, how do you build coalition in community?
Ooh, oh man. That question, the gold question. I think for me on an individual level, it goes down to a lot of showing up for that community, learning from that community, engaging in that community, learning to sit and listen when you're in their spaces, especially if it's a community that's not of my own. Obviously, I'm this is my community. I'm a guest here. No matter my marginalization, no matter unless there's something really homophobic or something really anti-Black being said, it's not my space. I am a guest. I should honor the people who are building this community space. I also tend to think about how can we build joy in these spaces between communities, because so many of us are running around with white miseducation in our heads. A lot of us don't know Asian American history. So we have a lot of misconceptions about Asian Americans. And a lot of us are running around with a very sanitized, a very whitewashed Black history. So we have a very narrow understanding of the Black experience. So that's a lot of work. That's a lot of internal work that I cannot control. What I can do, however, is offer a space for a new story, offer a space where folks can say, oh, I had all these ideas about Black people. You know, Black people are dangerous, Black people are criminals, Black people are whatever the media says. But if we're in this space and we're sharing food and there's music and we're singing together and marching together, what a wonderful experience that counters that miseducation, that counters these false narratives about another community.
I am so in love with the framing of it as, you know, writing a story, telling a story. Like, what story are we going to tell? Fighting these false narratives. Because that's what we're all doing at the end of the day.
Literally.
And like, truly, that's what we're all doing. And you can choose when you come into the activist space what story is being told and what story you want history to tell. So it's like multiple layers of storytelling and weaving a narrative. And I think it's great to have a space where it's like, you may be coming to this activist space, you may be coming in without all the answers, you may be brand new, but we're gonna have a good time, and we're gonna, because at the core of it, we all believe in these core values and what we're fighting for. And that's the most important thing. And I think a lot of times in activism, or for people, maybe not, well, actually, yes, in activism, but especially for people on the outside looking in, it can really look like, oh, you have to know everything and you have to really be on this level that can get to be kind of toxic and takes out the joy that you were talking about.
Absolutely.
And without joy, it's not sustainable, right?
Absolutely. And that elitism is quite frankly such a problem on the ground. It does create a sense of like exclusion sometimes, and a sense of like sometimes cancel culture. I'm not gonna lie. Like it's like, you don't know this one Malcolm X quote? Oh, banish her. And I'm like, we're all learning. Like, it's okay. We are all on different journeys. It's not my place to shame you for not knowing, I don't know, like what year Bayard Rustin went to India to like study nonviolent tactics. Like, please, girl, I don't know that shit. Like,
right. Especially when it comes to knowing those types of facets of like Black history, especially when you get into the more radical Black history or Asian American history and like the solidarities therein. I don't know about y'all, but when I learned about Malcolm X in my public education, I learned about Malcolm X basically as a foil to a whitewashed version of MLK.
Yep.
That was the limit. It was like, yeah, he also got assassinated, but he was actually kind of radical. We don't want to talk about them. Anyway, MLK was all about peace. Like, that's the limit. So of course you're going to be having people come to this space, probably more than not, who don't have that background.
Exactly.
And I would encourage people, if you're listening and you've not entered those spaces and you're curious, to just do it. And I'm sure there will be elitists on the ground, but find a space where you find your people, because I think we need more people doing this work and participating. That's the big thing, is turning out for people who are doing the organizing work, like Blasian March.
And, you know, what I also love about Blasian March is you don't have to be in person to participate, because we're also thinking about how can we be accessible. How can we try to include everybody as best as we can? Because if you're not including disability justice, it's not revolutionary. So, so for us, it's like, what can we live stream? What can we record for later? Or we also have action item toolkits, which are like Google Docs, which have like petitions, fundraisers, social media campaigns that kind of like help build out the solidarity work. There's also like educational articles, videos, like, you know, it's great that you're here, but if you can't make it, here's an option that you can still do at home. Like, if you don't feel safe, because COVID's still happening, we understand, alongside everything else is happening. Oh my God. Like,
nothing stopped.
Nothing stopped. We just stopped talking about it, you know.
Exactly. Which is kind of a pattern you'll notice in history when you study history. Nothing stopped. We just stopped talking about it. I love that y'all do that, because that's something also I think about, you know, being adjacent to activist spaces, working in different activist spaces, the accessibility of it all, because so much centers around cities and like big metropolitan areas. And that makes sense. There's a density of people, of course, but I think it's really hard for people who live in smaller cities or definitely rural communities to get in and figure out am I even part of this fabric? Is there anything for me to do here? And
Right.
what about my community that looks like this? And these issues that I face, how can I
Right.
apply it? So I love that you have resources for anybody to access and are thinking of accessibility for both disabled people, but also for those people who can't be local
Right.
as a piece of it. Because a lot of people, not just in activist spaces and creator spaces, et cetera, have really moved away from having virtual options post-pandemic. And that's been really frustrating as somebody who needs it sometimes for my own reasons, for accessibility purposes, and just knowing others that also need that type of thing. It's rough.
Right. But that's the power of podcasts.
That's the power of podcasts, because we could be here talking about it, educating people, getting people the information where they need to know. And to be clear, as we keep going through this conversation, like there will be a wealth of stuff in the show notes, so you can always go in your podcast app, go to the show notes, or you can go to our website where the show notes should be in full, because sometimes they don't display as well. Always go there because there's great information. I will link to Blasian March, all their stuff. So we've talked about the historical coalitions that have existed before. We've talked about figures and stuff, but I've just wondered who has been the biggest influence in your activism, because, again, the joy definitely comes through. And I think that's also why I was so hyped when I found y'all, because it does feel joyful even when you're scrolling through the Blasian March page or you're going through the Instagram stories. So yeah, who or what has been the biggest influence in your activism?
That question. I think historical figures wise, I would say Carlos Bulosan.
Okay.
He was a Filipino immigrant who came here after the United States annexed the Philippines from Spain after they won the war, which led to the Philippine-American War, which led to all that resistance work, which led to a very large number of Black soldiers defecting and joining the Filipinos. I'm like, yes. Yes, and. So actually, I received a copy of his memoir around the same time that Black Lives Matter was founded. And, I had gone to like maybe 2 protests on campus. The first one I'd gone to was my junior year, and that was the Asian Pride rally, which was like, you see where all the pride and joy, like, organizing comes from, right? So, like, we were celebrating the pride and joy of being Asian. And then the second protest I'd gone to was because the university had poorly mistreated a Black employee. So that was a thing.
No.
Yeah. But, I had thought, that was college. There's the bubble, quote unquote, which shows my privilege at the time, or what I thought was my privilege at the time, being like, oh, that was college. It was a bubble. I can do what I want. This is the real world. It was a cute little
moment.
Right. She had a moment. And now this is the real world. You can't, like, that's dangerous.
Right.
If only I and
If only you knew.
If only I knew. If only I knew. So, yeah, that was right around the time Black Lives Matter had started by Iyer Tometi, Patrisse, Cullors, and Alicia Garza. But, I was kind of like, that's real world. You don't go there. That's not safe. I was also trying to get more into my dance career because, dance world is also shitty and toxic. It's everyone talks, if you're seen at a protest, it was definitely high risk of being labeled outspoken, meaning hard to work with, meaning do not hire. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So, but then I got this book at the Filipino alumni party, Carlos Bulosan's America's in the Heart. And he talks some shit, y'all. Like, the tea is poured. He speaks on the racial violence towards Filipinos in the States. He speaks on the exploitation of Filipinos in the States, all the very cheap manual labor, some people who weren't paid properly. He even goes into some lynching scenes of Filipinos.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And that was such an eye-opener for me. It was like, well, if all of my ancestors, Black and Asian, went through this, why am I sitting here being afraid? So I always say it. Yeah, I'm like, Filipino literature, Asian literature catapulted me into Black Lives Matter. The beauty of being mixed.
That is so neat. That is so neat.
Yeah.
It's so neat because I've also, on the flip side, recently talked to people who have talked about Black activism catapulting them into their awareness of their Asian American identity or Asian American activism. And again, I think it's that point of solidarity, but also, yes, the beauty of being mixed, of being having those points of connection just like inherent within you.
Yeah.
It's very neat. I think that's very cool. I would love to read that book. Actually, you were talking about the tea and I was like, oh.
It's pretty heavy, but it's beautiful work. Yeah, and there's something like wonderful about us being mixed. Like for everyone, they think, oh, these things are like nuanced and subtle. I'm like, no, for us, it's the explicit because we literally live in the quote unquote nuance. We exist quote unquote in the gray. So like this gray area for us is clear. It is the obvious because we live it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Precisely. People are like, oh, I don't know. I've had so many, this is kind of an aside, but I've definitely had friends, well-meaning, of course, oh, I don't know how that is, or it's probably complicated, concepts, having questions about different issues with mixed identity or where these intersections happen with Black or for me, Native American, like politics or whatever. And it's always thrown me because I'm like, I appreciate you're being careful. I appreciate that you're,
right,
trying to let me lead the conversation, but it's actually not that complicated.
It's not that complicated.
It's really not that complicated.
It's just our common humanity. There's nothing else to it, honey.
Yeah, it's actually really, really easy to understand, even from your perspective as somebody not mixed. So yes, thank you for saying that. What would you say is a common misconception about Black and Asian coalition, whether historical or currently that you've seen in your work?
Oh. So one thing I get really frustrated about, at least in modern day coalition work, is I think a lot of us are still viewing solidarity through a white narrative, through a white lens. We are still, apart from the misconceptions I already mentioned, I think people are still viewing movement work through the basis of hierarchy, through the basis of I have to be the dominant voice in the space. I have to have control. So that for me has looked like in some Black spaces, it has looked like, oh, Asians can be here as long as they're silent, or as long as they say whatever I say, or as long as they are always apologizing for the anti-Blackness in the entire Asian community.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's not fair. Like you don't want to be treated that way as a Black person. Why should somebody else? And so like, obviously this to me reads as like trauma-based organizing or trauma-based movement work, which trauma-based work can be informative. I think for trauma-based organizing, that can guide us in many different directions towards like healing circles or towards dialogues. But when it translates into this interpersonal violence, then it does not help. I think that's the biggest thing. I also think because people are still trying to be like the dominant voice in the space, we are having a hard time moving as a collective. And I see that on both sides. We are always mentioning solidarity with other people, or some folks are still thinking in ways that I think are really unhelpful. Like, for example, I think people are trying to be the next MLK. I think people...
I'm sorry, that's wild to me.
I see this so often because people are trying to not work as a collective. People try to work as like, I'm the leader.
Figurehead.
You're the figurehead. Everyone else follows me. Do you recognize that MLK worked in a collective, right? Like Gracie Boggs, Bayard, Rustin, like the list goes on and on and on. And more to the point, leaders do not come without collectives. And so I've seen pretty often on both sides, because everyone wants to be the dominant voice, everyone wants to be a leader, everyone wants to go at it alone. And I'm sitting here, it's like, but no one made history doing things by themselves. Everything came out of collective work. So
for sure.
That's why I'm proud of the Blasian March. I am very proud of everyone else. Sanera, who led the New Haven chapter with Chidima, Lee Painter Kim over in Los Angeles. Gotta give a shout out to Kate Venturina, Young Kyung Chi, who led the Chicago movement. Like, I love that it's no longer about me. I love that it's like, here are other people taking the lead. I do it all the time.
It's also easier.
So much easier. Oh my God. I get way more sleep. I don't sleep at all.
Right. Like, it cannot all be one person. It cannot be. It will burn whatever movement, whatever project, whatever you're doing in general in life.
Absolutely.
Create community, because you will burn out and the thing will die faster.
Absolutely.
I like the way that you put all of that. I've always viewed it as American individualism, because America is a hyper individualistic society. Like, if you look at other countries and other societies, they're much more community based. And so it's disappointing, but not surprising to me that feeds into how people approach activism from this very individualistic cultural frame set, which is basically, if this is the first time people are hearing about it, it's basically main character syndrome. Like every American has main character syndrome that they need to unpack. We all do. We all have it. You got to unpack it though and find the community-based person inside of you. We can all be more community-based. Yeah, it can really hamper a movement. We've seen it time and time again where you get these people who do kind of come up to be big figureheads in their own right in various activist spaces. And that usually doesn't end well, usually. I would argue that MLK didn't end well. So, there you go.
Oh, yeah. You can argue that.
Yeah, you could argue that. Yeah, but you were also talking about trauma-based activism, and I didn't have the words to put to it, but that is something that I encounter a lot in this work, even though, again, I don't see myself as an activist podcast. We're just kind of activist adjacent. Like, it's a stepping stone. If you're going that way, you could stop by, But it's something that I encounter, from listeners, from people on social media, even people in my real life when I tell them what I've been up to. On both sides, they bring up the traumas that, both groups have, suffered at the hands of each other, which are valid, but it's really hard to bring them out of that. We can't center the narrative around that. Like, that is true. There is healing that needs to be done, and that can exist at the same time as the coalition work that we can do together and the solidarity we can do all together. Because also I would beg people to think about, yes, literally in the moment, who is doing the harm to each other? Yes, each other. But more largely, who does this conflict serve?
That part.
White supremacy.
That part.
That is who it serves. So let's not do that is kind of where I land. Let's not get so stuck in the trauma that it is just feeding conflict and feeding basically the breaking apart of what could be beautiful solidarity. That was, I think, kind of a big question, a big point in the conversation. So to kind of turn it around, I would like for you to tell me about a time when you felt hopeful about the state of Black and Asian coalition or relations.
Oh, so for folks from the podcast, you cannot see this, but my background is actually a virtual background. And it shows several folks of...
It's beautiful.
It's like, I was like, this photo is my life. Basically, they're folks who are Black, who are Asian, who are of other racial identities. They're holding up a banner that's red. It has cherry blossoms on it. Shout out to the artist Adan Palermo. And it says, "Unite Against Hate." And I loved this rally in particular because it was our first rally that was specifically to uplift the Asian American communities. And it was done in collaboration with several other femmes of color. And it was a whole coalition. Like, there was like a white Pakistani woman, there was an Afro-Latina, there was a Chinese, Filipina, indigenous woman, there was a Chinese American woman, there was a Korean woman who's adoptee on the team. And I love that action because there were so many Black people who were doing the inverse of what so many Asian Americans were doing the year prior. So earlier I was talking about how a lot of Asian folks were like in the background and logistics. So many Black folks were on safety, were medics, were leading protest chants. A lot of Black folks were also speakers to speak in solidarity, to uplift. And I was really hopeful because I felt like it was a really great moment where we had full control of the story. So much of our history has been so erased, it's been so sanitized because we have lost control of the narrative. We have forfeited our stories for survival purposes in this country, which sucks. I mean, that could look like your parents not teaching you your home language. Or, like, we've given up our stories for survival, and because of that, we don't know who we are. We've lost who we are. And this was a moment where I was like, no, we actually are taking back. We are reclaiming this story. We are creating a new story. So I had a lot of hope. Unfortunately, a lot of mainstream media erased all the... Oh my God. The fact that the media... some news outlets did a really great job. Shout out to all the folks at AJ Plus who, like, covered the rally, showed the intersectionality. But then I would see so many other news outlets who completely erased the Black people from this action. And I was personally really triggered a few times. There was like one journalist, and now that I work in journalism, back then I was not as fully entrenched in journalism as I am now. So I understand that some of the photo choices of articles is the editorial staff. The writer has nothing to do with that. But yeah, like, you would see articles like, ways Black people can help Asian people with a photo of this rally without the Black
no.
people. And I was just like,
Oh no.
yeah, and I was like, that is really triggering. I mean, I was trying to walk away. I was so upset. I I felt so bad. I like emailed the journalists all my feelings. I apologized to her later. She never responded, which I'm like, that's fine. Like, I understand.
Right.
You're probably like, who is this? Who is this bitch in my emails? But even like another journalist, in their op-ed, they wrote like something along the lines, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something along the lines like, where are the Black people? And the article used a photo from this action. So after I had calmed down, I know, after I calmed down, I was like, just so you know, the editors who used that photo, Black people were there. If it were for Black people, that photo would not exist. Just saying. He never responded, but whatever. But I think it still gives me hope because down the line, actually my first ever article in journalism, they're an LGBT online news outlet. They commissioned me to write a piece and I told the story of that action. So I was like, you know what? I still have hope.
Yeah.
Because, we are finally learning to take control of our story in a world where the stories cannot be erased as easily anymore because we live in a digital era and so much of that content, unless you're like taking it all down completely off the internet, which is not possible because screenshots, hello. We now are learning to control the story and tell the story as we want to tell it.
I think it's also difficult with mainstream media because in general, I think there is a kind of a human bias towards simplicity and like black and white thinking. And definitionally, solidarity doesn't exist in the black and white, right? It's a coming together. It's
Absolutely.
a melding. And that can get complicated for when you're thinking of journalism or even just quick sound bites or, a 240 character tweet when you just want it to say the simple thing, the easy thing that your readers expect it to say, And I do have I know people who worked in journalism too. I do have a lot of sympathy for having to navigate wanting to be a journalist while also the powers that be wanting to answer to that easier thing that you can tap into with your readership. And it's difficult, but I think people like you, groups like the Blasian March, other lovely activist groups, and smaller journalist teams are doing good work in fighting through that. And like you said, creating your own narrative of, no, this is what it is. This is what solidarity can look like. This is what action can look like. And I also have a lot of hope. I hope to see more. I hope to see more people get involved because I think activism can be kind of daunting if you've never done it before, like if you've never done any work.
Totally.
Especially in the in-person space, but also there's a lot of virtual opportunities I still think people find daunting, like, oh, I can't call your senators, do these actions. It just is so foreign, kind of, because again, this is also not, we love to teach about MLK, but we don't like to teach about what it's like on the ground. How do you get involved with these things? What does that look like,
Right.
So how would you say folks can get involved, maybe with Blasian March specifically, or just in general, like get involved in activism spaces?
I think in general, first, before I plug the Blasian March, I think first you need to know your story. You need to know who you are. You need to know who your people have come from, what your people have gone through. You need to understand what your legacy is. Because if you don't know these things, it's going to be very, very easy for white supremacy and false narratives to dictate or manipulate your organizing. I also would like to say what brings you joy and how can you bring that joy into the activist space. Like, it doesn't have to be a protest. Maybe you are the person who likes to have flower crown building sessions. My two friends are amazing on the ground. They literally have like Black Asian solidarity, like flower crown making sessions, and they make flower crowns for each other. It's the cutest thing. Like,
that's adorable.
Yes, I was like, yes, this is my life. It can look like that can be very critical activism. That is very critical storytelling work as well as healing work. I would also suggest looking into Deepa Iyer's Ecosystem of Change map. It's a really, really accessible guide to help you figure out which roles kind of work best for you. So there's things like first responders, like who really likes to be on the streets immediately, or like who likes to call your senator when something shitty happens in government. Like there's that role, for example. There are roles like healers, weavers, who are folks who know how to connect other people, connect movements, things. There's so many ways you can reimagine. I mean, for example, this space, Culture by Culture, is a podcast. This is really
Yeah.
critical work because, like, you're telling people stories. Also, you are now connecting. You're weaving together your audience with new voices, new ideas. That's really critical work. That's really
Thank you.
solid. It's really solid work because at the end of the day, a lot of the change has to happen in people's mind, people's perspectives. And what better way to do it than by having dialogue?
Yep,
So,
that's exactly how I think. I want people, again, listeners, I'm not saying you got to go hit the streets. If you do,
if you
great.
don't, it's
But
okay.
you don't. It's okay. I think sometimes just changing your own perspective and how you show up in your life is enough. Because that is something I talk about a lot. I would love to see Deepa Iyer's Organization of Change. I'm definitely going to look into it. But that's something I've said to people in my life. Again, being mixed. During 2020, there were a lot of people who came to me who were like, what can I do? I don't know how. I've never done this before. And I'm always said, it takes all types. Like there needs to be people all over this
Right.
in order to actually facilitate change. It's going to take a whole lot. So wherever you think you thrive, whatever skill set you have, apply it. If you're an artist, apply that. Like it doesn't have to be the whatever stereotype you have about action and what that looks like. It could be, yes, conversations one-on-one with people, or like if you host a podcast, having those conversations there. If you're an artist, creating art around that, creating music around that, whatever it is,
Right.
it can look however it looks to you.
Right. And like one example I kind of lean on when I think about that would be like Rosa Parks and Claudette Colvin, for example. It was evidence that Claudette Colvin, even though she sat on a bus 9 months before Rosa Parks, she was a teenager, pregnant, darker skinned.
Right.
But whereas Rosa Parks became more of a front facing icon, Claudette Colvin was a plaintiff in a legal case for the integration of buses in Alabama, which succeeded. So, like, there needs to be a network. There needs to be a many-headed hydra. I know. I'm sorry.
I love that visual of just like this many-headed hydra of activism, just
Yes!
like trying to attack the patriarchy and white supremacy. Beautiful.
Yeah, so like, I mean, I have activist journalist friends. I have friends who are doing all the legal work. We all have our role to play. And as long as it brings you joy, because this work is not easy. So if it brings you joy, go for it. If it doesn't bring you joy, then don't do it. There are other ways to contribute and to become part of the movement work.
I totally agree. So how can folks get involved with the Blasian March specifically?
Yeah, so definitely follow us on all platforms. That's Blasian March, Blasian March on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Ooh, we still have Facebook? I guess we do. YouTube, Twitter. I'm sorry. Until it's like defunct, we still have to work with certain structures, unfortunately.
It's so funny that people used to have that reaction to Facebook, like, yeah, I know we're on Facebook, but now it's like, Twitter, yeah.
You can also find us at blasianmarch.org. Our website is still under construction, so it will take you to a link tree. You can find all of our fundraisers for our upcoming actions, such as our Pride Rally in New York City. Next month, we are also organizing for an affirmative action rally in DC. So I'll be in your
DC,
area.
DC, come through.
Yes. So yeah. You can do that. Or if you want to keep the Blasian March going, please hire me to do some speaking events.
Yes.
Throw a girl some coin.
As you can see, they're a great speaker.
Thank
Hello.
you. And you can look up my information at diaryofafirebird.com. That's also all of my platforms. So yeah, I mean, my work as a journalist, my public speaking, it's what's keeping me housed. I can continue to organize Blasian March. So it's a shameless plug, but it's the truth.
It's not shameless. It's important. It's important to plug the things that we're working on. Because a lot of times, people just don't know where they can plug in, where they can find things. And people are searching. Could be the magic of algorithms if algorithms actually serve the purposes for good, but they don't. So that's neither here nor there. My final question to you then is, if you could write the future of Black and Asian coalition, what would it look like to you?
Well, as a fantasy writer.
Ooh, let's go.
I feel like I would love to see a time and a space where even though we can celebrate our unique cultures, we have come to a place where we are no longer adhering to white supremacist boundaries of race.
Ooh.
I mean, the fact that you and I exist, obviously those boundaries are fabrications, Like, I would love to see more celebrations, more resource sharing, more just general kindness between our communities. I mean, obviously, because white society has made such an everlasting mark on our identities, I don't think we're going to abolish the idea of race anytime soon. However, like I said earlier, I think it'd be wonderful to still acknowledge and celebrate our uniqueness while also celebrating each other. I'm having this whole sci-fi, like Star Trek vision right now. It's great.
I love it. I'm with you. I love fantasy. I love to imagine life in kind of a fantastical way. And
that's why I love fantasy. Like, there's so much you can imagine, mostly like from writers of color that are out there right now. Like,
they're doing the dang thing.
Doing the dang thing.
It's so amazing to watch. And publishing's still very broken. Let's be clear.
Facts.
It's very, very, very broken. But for the stories that are even still getting through somehow, just wonderful things are being written and wonderful stories are being told that imagine a future or an alternate reality that is informed by our reality and paints such beautiful pictures. I would love to see some version of that become a reality one day, but we got to do the work.
Gotta do the work.
Got to do the work. We can't just sit here and fantasize. Although that'd be great. But somebody's got to do it.
Manifesting.
We got to manifest sometimes, right? Well, thank you so much for joining me. This was honestly a blast. This conversation was full of as much joy as it seems to come through with all your work with the Blasian March. You've already plugged yourself, but real brief, you can go ahead and recap where the good folks can find you and what you have in the works.
Sure. You can find me personally at diaryofafirebird.com. That's also my Twitter, my Instagram, my barely used TikTok, which is fine. I accept I'm a millennial, not a Gen Z. I was like, I have it for like purposes. And also on my website, you can see all of my writing, other podcasts I've been on. More about my public speaking is there as well. So please hire a girl so she can continue to organize the Blasian March. And then also you can find the Blasian March at blasianmarch.org. That's also Blasian March on all platforms. And upcoming events, we are holding in Sacramento on June 30th. The Asian American Liberation Network has partnered up to throw a Blasian March out there in Sacramento, as well as a book fair in Sacramento.
Very cool.
Here for it. Shout out to that entire amazing team. And then also we will be in Washington, D.C. very soon. Don't know when, pending the Supreme Court's decision, but we will be rallying for affirmative action.
Woohoo.
So stay tuned for all the details there.
Basically, got a lot popping off at any one moment. So
literally.
Watch that space. Watch that space. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. I hope y'all had as much fun as we did chatting. Thank you for listening. I'm curious how y'all show up and do community work wherever you're at. You can let me know at CultureX Podcast on Twitter or IG. Still not TikTok. Not to say I refuse, but I just cannot. I can be bullied. I will say I can be bullied, but I'm just not there yet. So I respect everybody who makes any time to be on TikTok because it is not me. So
valid.
Yeah, I know. Until next time, everyone, keep it chill and keep it nerdy.